policies, and an amendment of the Pension Act 1990, 47A, no action which would have the effect of amending or winding up a scheme may be taken by an employer, a trustee or a board under section 48, 49, 50, 50A or 50B prior to a negotiation process with scheme members, the nature and scope of which negotiation process shall be laid out by the Minister in regulations, and 2, upon the conclusion of the negotiation process, neither the board, the relevant employer nor the trustees may issue direction to wind up a scheme without first obtaining the consent of a majority of members to do so. And I want to read that into record because I know they'll be ruled out of order at the committee stage. I presume they will be because they're not part of the bill, but that's what we'll be putting into the pension bill, and it's a very, very important aspect because many people are very angry and annoyed that this was in the first proposal in May of this year, and they were taken out in June and then put into a separate bill. So I'll leave it at that. That's what it is, it's a separate bill, isn't it?
Right. Thank you, Deputy. 10 minutes left in the game.
Can I just clarify just 1 second? Sorry, Deputy, before you finish. We have 2 different bills.
Yeah.
So we have the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill, and this is the Social Welfare Bill.
Yeah.
So the other one is not gone away. It's coming back. We've got a committee stage in the next couple of weeks, and so that's where they should go.
Yeah,
but look,
I know,
it doesn't matter,
I know.
but it's not gone away.
Yeah.
Sorry, Deputy.
Reid.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
10 minutes
I'm delighted to have the opportunity to comment briefly on the Social Welfare Bill 2017. There are, of course, some welcome measures in the bill before us, which will give legislative effect to the changes announced in Budget 2018. And in order to effect those changes, the Social Welfare Acts, Maternity Protection Act 1994, National Training Fund Act 2000 will be amended and extended. And, of course, the Government decided to continue with its partial restoration of social protection payments for next year, with €5 increases across most payments. But disappointingly, and in keeping with last year, of course, these partial restorations, Minister, they won't come into effect until the end of March 2018. In my own pre-budget submission to Minister Cathaoirleach, I called for a social protection package of approximately €500 million increase in department allocations, which would have included €7 per week increases. In the event, the Government chose to only increase the social protection budget by less than €300 million, or under 1.5%, and most of the increase is funded, of course, by savings from the fall in unemployment. But I welcome Section 12 as it partially restores the weekly earning disregard for those in receipt of the one-parent family payment from €110 per week to €130 per week. Again, in my own submission, I called for full restoration back to €146.50 per week at an estimated cost of €11.1 million. And in some of your government's cruelest austerity years cuts, Minister, lone parents, of course, were targeted, and the weekly income disregard dropped to a low of €75 per week in 2015 and €60 per week in 2016. Surveys and CSO statistics have been shown for years that lone parent families experience the highest consistent poverty rates than any other cohort in Irish society. And in the most recent Silk report, this rate was 26.2% for consistent poverty. 57.9% experienced deprivation compared to 25.5% of the rest of the population. And yet the Social Welfare and Pensions Act 2012 further discriminated against lone parents by ceasing payment of the one-parent family payment once the youngest child reached 7 years of age. And at that point, lone parents are switched to job seekers' transitional payment. And while studies show that these draconian so-called reforms did move some lone parents into employment, the majority of which, of course, is low-paid, part-time and precarious employment, they also led to over 30% of recipients of the new payment losing over 10% of their weekly income. And of course, Minister, losing 10% of your weekly income when you're already in poverty is soul-destroying. And the previous government and this government should have been doing everything in its power to reverse changes that meant that cohort of Irish families are being pushed further into poverty and consistent poverty. And the Indicon report on those changes were published by your department at the beginning of October 2017. And I'm just wondering, Minister, if you, in your reply, what action are you going to take on foot of that? At the Dáil Budgetary Oversight Committee last week, we had a lengthy briefing and discussion on gender inequality and gender-proofing of budgets into the future. And the committee is, under your colleague Josepha Madigan, is determined to take this issue in the context of budgets, take on this issue in the context of budgets 2018-2019. Now, a key issue I raised again, of course, which my colleague Deputy Collins has just raised once more, were changes made in Budget 2012 to the PRSI contribution bands for the pension, which state pension, which also disproportionately impacted on women. On the 19th of October, of course, the Dáil voted on the motion on correcting pension inequities. And, of course, on 21st of February this year, I also raised the topic during Leaders' Questions with former Taoiseach Kenny and called for a reversal of the Budget 2012 changes and for those affected to be reimbursed. Age Action Ireland's excellent report towards a fair state pension for women pensioners research, which was researched and written by Miss Maureen Bassett, set out in detail the number of women people impacted by the change from 4 bands to 6 and highlighted that almost 2/3 of those affected pensioners were and continue to be women. And many people reaching pension age, of course, are not even aware of these changes and are often shocked, upset and angry when they realise what was done. I'm sure you found that yourself, Cathaoirleach, in your information clinics around Kildare. But even more so when they learned that the government of the day had been warned that such changes would disproportionately affect women, women who had little or no childcare supports while rearing their families and so had no choice but to stop working in many cases. So while a €5 increase in weekly pension rates this year and last are of course welcome, there are many who would think that those underhanded austerity year changes should be reversed and that pension inequity should indeed be corrected. And we've heard your own comments on this, Minister. You clearly think it was a crazy decision, although you voted for it. Now you're in the ministerial office in the department and you have the opportunity to reverse it and to ensure that those women whom I meet week in, week out, who've lost 30 or 40 euro due to those changes for the rest of their lives, that we do bring them justice. And I think that would be a good ambition maybe for the rest of your administration. Another important point on equality, of course, is the continued discrimination, Cathaoirleach, of those citizens under 26 in their lower rates of job seekers. And while this year they're receiving the full €5 weekly increase, they're still receiving far less than other job seekers. And young citizens aged 18 to 24 years will receive a JSA of only €107 a week, even after this bill is passed. And again, in my own submission, I called for an increase of €30 per week for all under 26s at a cost of €24 million. I think the government narrative, of course, that young people all live at home with their mammies and daddies to pay their rent and buy them food is completely disrespectful for those who don't have that safety net and who are trying to afford city rents while looking for jobs. And this year we saw a huge increase in homelessness, of course, in the 18 to 24-year-old age group. Section 3 of the bill, of course, amends the definition of share-based remuneration because of the introduction of the Key Employee Engagement Programme, the KEEP programme, announced in the budget. However, reports are suggesting, Minister, that this share option, while initially welcome, will now have a minimal positive impact for employees of many innovative business sectors. I welcome, of course, sections 4, 5 and 6, which increase the rates of maternity, paternity and adoptive benefit to €240. Section 8, of course, renames family income supplement to working family payment, and this renaming comes into effect from the 1st of January 2018. But the new income thresholds of €521, €622 and €723 don't come into operation at the end of March. So once again, I note, as indeed with the very changed name and function of your department, Employment and Social Protection, we always seem to follow, it reminds me of Work and Pensions, Minister, we always seem to follow British models with regard to necessary social protection supports. In fact, we renamed virtually all of our social protection supports after what the British were doing, but yet we would be bitterly opposed, of course, to the austerity approach of successive Tory governments over there. I note anyway that the number of FIST recipients has now risen to almost 56,000 families from 22,000 a decade ago. And it's also good to see, Minister, that you extended the back-to-work dividend beyond March 31. Section 14 is a welcome provision and should have been introduced long ago, providing for the payment of maternity benefit in cases of premature birth. And Section 16 in Part 3 amends Section 4 of the National Treatment Fund 2000 to provide for the increase to 0.8%, which will come into effect on 1st January 2018. And this levy, of course, is set to increase annually down to 2020 to 0.9% in 2019 and 1% in 2020. I had called for it, Minister, to be increased to 1% from 2018, which would yield a much-needed €200 million for third-level funding. And you might remember Taoiseach Varadkar, he refused to indicate to me on a Leader's Question not too long ago, whether or not he has made a decision about loans, about student loans, because this obviously is a major feature of funding third-level education. Of course, the Minister's Department it is our largest in terms of expenditure, with 32.8% of our total expenditure, although, as you know, half that expenditure we sort of fund ourselves through our social insurance, more than half indeed. And I understand the level of transactions underway at the department is staggering. Of course, I think you told us that before, Ministers, that figures from 2015 report show that 1.6 million people received a payment, 1.7 million applications were processed, and 8.3 million telephone calls were answered. And that's very impressive. But I do want to raise a few issues around the way in which the Department of Social Protection works. The length of time for processing applications and appeals, it remains far too long for many payments. As a volunteer director myself of community projects and organisations, I first-hand experience of the requirements around employing community employment participants, and I've noticed the frustrations of our staff and management in navigating what seems to me to be an ever more complicated system. So are there plans to move your department towards a more user-friendly system, and do you have the personnel resources? We just heard from Minister Flanagan earlier that the Department of Justice seems to be down by a third of its staff, so I just wonder what the situation is in relation to your department. One last issue I want to raise is the interpretation of the exceptional needs. I've been contacted by an outstanding lawyer in my constituency who highlighted that the Department of Social Protection staff are recently stating that in order to approve an exceptional needs payment, that the need must also be, and I quote, unforeseen. And you told me that, Minister, on 7 November last. You said, under supplementary welfare allowance, I'm quoting you, the Department may make a single exceptional needs payment to help meet essential once-off and unforeseen expenditure which a person could not reasonably be expected to meet out of their weekly income. And you said you provided 31.5 million. But however, as the barrister who raised the issue with me says, if a person's mother is ill and dying for a number of months, the funeral costs may indeed be exceptional and not unforeseen. And issues like this are arising DSP offices, definitely around Dublin, but probably also in other areas of the country. So exceptional needs is one area I'd also like you to look at. I wanted to mention very briefly also that in my own submission I included a request that perhaps a pilot basic income programme should be proceeded with in order to see how feasible it would be to introduce basic income on a larger scale. We know that Finland, I think, and maybe one or two other countries are experimenting with that. As always, of course, I want to mention very briefly the Social Insurance Fund, which last year stood at just under 11 billion. I understand the fund is now back in surplus, and I'd like the Minister, perhaps in her reply, maybe to tell us what's the current standing of the fund and what's the contribution. And looking at the fund, have you any plans to expand the range of benefits available, especially to workers and their families? So in general, Cathaoirleach, and thanks for the little extra, I welcome some of the partial restorations provided for in this bill, but I believe the Government has the resources to do much more, especially in the area of gender and disability equality proofing. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. We now move to the next speakers, which Deputies Danny Healy-Rae, Michael Collins and Matthew McGrath. They have 6 minutes and 1/3 each. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I suppose I may deviate a bit from what's in the bill, but it applies to people getting social welfare and not getting social welfare, what I want to talk about. First of all, I think I need to highlight something that's ridiculous. We all know and encourage young people to start off working when they're young, because if they develop a work ethic while they're young, they tend to continue with that. But the way the SUSI grant is set up at the present time, if a youngster earns more than 4,500 and puts them, which will then, if they earn more than that and it puts them over the threshold for receiving the SUSI grant, what it's doing is encouraging them to stay at home and draw social welfare. I think that should be remedied and allow the youngsters to earn as much as possible during holiday time and at other times that they can source work and get work. Then there are other people on courses, back to education or whatever, and it's a requirement that they come into, for many of them, come into tools new every week. And even though they have proof that they're on courses, and some of them want to be carers and they have to do these courses, they're still required to come in and travel distances. I know one person that's travelling 27 miles to come in every Monday, and they ask him the question, has he any proof that he's looking for work? Surely it is proof enough, Minister, when he's on a course to become a carer and he's trying to improve himself and to improve his ability, that this should be proof enough. And there we are paying someone in Tuasnua to organise and meet this man on a weekly basis. It's absolutely ridiculous. I still say that self-employed people who find themselves at different times, some of the work they get is seasonal, and they come up against an absolutely stone wall when they're trying to get payments just to tide them over for a short time, and they're really put through the hoop, and it takes weeks and weeks before they get anything. I have people in these situations coming in to me actually saying they're hungry. That is a fact. And you know what, they finish up going to the Vincent de Paul. That's an honest truth, Minister, and that's not right. There should be some system. These people pay taxes when they're working, and they actually pay for us being here. They contribute in a way for us and for the services in the country. But then when they find themselves in without work, it can happen. And it's even still happening, even though the country is supposed to be turned around, but it's happening down in Kerry anyway. And they're not able to tax their vans, and they can't pay their insurance. And if they could get something to tide them over for a small while, they're very confident of getting work again. But I know several of them now that back over the last few months have had to go to the Vincent de Paul to get food to actually feed themselves. That's not right, Minister. The back to education is for back to students that are people that want to go back to education. There is silly obstacles and stupid obstacles preventing them from getting the back to education payment. And just to say, if you want to go for a second level course, you must first of all be getting a social welfare payment, and it must be being paid to you when you actually start on the education program, or before, just prior to getting the back to education allowance. And so you have to be on it for at least 3 months. So if someone presents in July and the course is starting in September, what it actually means is they won't be on the course for 3 months, so they'll have to stay on job seekers for the whole 12 months till they come to the following year. That's absolutely ridiculous, Minister. And I hope you hear what I'm saying. I'll say to this Minister again, if you become unemployed or you want to go on a back to education course and to get that back to education allowance, for a second level course you must be on it for 3 months. So if you're unemployed, you only become unemployed in July, you will not qualify for the course in September. You'll have to stay on job seekers for another 12 months. Minister, I'm saying to you that that's ridiculous. For third level courses, you have to be on the social welfare payment for 9 months. And so that means if you haven't been on the social welfare payment for the 9 months preceding September, you will not qualify for the course, and you'll have to stay on job seekers for the whole rest of the year. That's costing the country money. And just to say the last thing, time spent in prison in the Irish state can count towards the qualifying period provided you establish an entitlement to a qualifying social welfare payment. So it seems to me that someone, a brigade that finished up in prison, he's being seen after better than the person that was working up till near the date of looking to get the back to education allowance. Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Gorla. I am happy to have the opportunity to speak on this bill tonight. This bill is important as it provides for the social welfare measures as announced in the budget for the coming year. Many of these measures, such as the increase to maternity and adoptive benefits, are more than welcome. However, I note that these measures are only coming into effect at the end of March 2018. So I ask you, Minister, as I asked you during my budget statements, why the delay in introducing these increases? Why do mothers, fathers, adoptive parents and one-parent families have to wait nearly 7 months for their increases? How come these measures did not come into effect immediately, like the introduction of the sugar tax and other taxation measures that were introduced in the budget? This is not simply good enough. Any increase in a social welfare payment is welcome, small though it may be, but there are many people who rely on social welfare that are struggling in this country. Old age pensioners are left struggling for their pennies after working all of their lives in the country. They feel as if they have been forgotten about and are rejected by you and previous governments, and that is a very sad thing. Minister, during the budget I raised the important issues about pensions for women who left the workforce to rear the family and are now being discriminated against for this. I would like to have seen this anomaly addressed here. School children over the age of 18 and their parents receive absolutely no assistance from the state. It is scandalous that children who are in education, costing parents huge amounts of money, are not even entitled to the child allowance. And it's very, very wrong, and it's very hurtful towards a lot of parents and a huge financial burden on many families. In the state. Second level education is very expensive, and the back to school allowance doesn't extend far enough to cover the year-long costs that face older students. Equally, especially as many may need additional classes or grinds in their Leaving Cert cycle. I must admit it is good to see the amendment of the Maternity Protection Act addressed here. I want to commend my colleagues in the Green Party for introducing this vital measure that extends maternity leave for parents of premature babies. Other areas that come under your brief and that need to be discussed and just briefly is the debt benefit, Minister. It's a huge issue again for a lot of families, you know, at a very difficult time. And I suppose me, as many other deputies, get a huge amount of calls when somebody has lost a loved one in their family, and they're asking to see is there some little bit of a benefit, you know, to pay off the funeral bill. And I think there's a savage cut, really, and a brutal cut to many families, and it needs to be addressed down the road. And we have to look at schemes that are out there. You know, there's a lot of schemes, a lot of what I feel is they're like vultures today. Tuas Nua. As soon as somebody leaves a work scheme or leaves anything, left us straight away, pulling them in to this. I don't know who's making money here. Like, are they making some sort of a profit, or are they on some sort of a percentage or something? Because they definitely are like vultures out there, and they're taking innocent people. They're making them tum the roadside. They're soaked wet. They haven't got. Some people haven't got transport to the nearest town. It could be from Castletownbere down into Bantry. It's very, very unfair, and this has to be looked into. It's totally unfair. There's a treatment. The treatment of the people that are on social welfare in this country is now turning into be appalling, because there's a belief here. I had somebody that rang me the other day. There was a community welfare officer in West Cork. They came out, they were roaring, crying. They're no longer community welfare officers. They're community get rid of you officers. And Minister, you have to stand by the people here, and you have to stand up to the people here and accept that some people are in difficult circumstances. In some places there is not as much employment as there is in maybe the bigger cities, in rural places, and there's an assumption there they must get off welfare, and that's it, and that's not good enough. And I'd ask you, Minister, to personally look into that, because you are a Minister that you can liaise with and you can speak to, and you do your best in fairness. I grant you that. I'm not criticising you here personally, but I think that there's a perception out there that there's employment, because there's employment in Dublin, there's employment in Ireland, but when you live in rural Ireland there is no employment, or little or no employment, and when you have companies out there on a profit per basis to get people back to work too, they're acting like vultures, and they're forcing people into situations that they don't feel they're able to. And I suppose we have to find out, are they on a percentage? If they're on a percentage, it's obvious what they're up to. And look, with C and TUS and RSS schemes that are under your brief, again, I would appreciate maybe at some stage we might discuss that, because there is one shoe doesn't fit all. As such, the CE scheme is a great scheme in ways, but some people are going home back on welfare, and they would appreciate spending another year, or the community groups would appreciate having them another year. The same with the TUS and the rural social scheme. In fairness, did get extra people, and that's to be commended. There's a lot of issues that need to be addressed going forward, Minister, and look forward to working with you on them.
Madam McGrath.
Look, Minister, I'm delighted that you're back for this debate. This bill is envisaged to give legislative effect to a range of social welfare measures announced in the expenditure report on the 10th of October 2017, including increases in the weekly welfare rates of pensions, benefits and allowances, and a proportionate increase for qualified adult dependents, as well as an increase in the qualified child increase payment. We welcome on those, but like my colleagues, very denied that they have to wait till next March or April to get it. You could have fell in the meanwhile. He nearly fell today. He really scattered and did get nothing until he come back. Maybe it could be next March or April again. Provisions are also included which provide for the extension of entitlement to the maternity benefit and maternity leave in cases of premature births. Indeed, I understand it is in the extended period of the benefit will be equivalent to the duration between the actual date of birth of the premature baby and the date when the maternity leave was expected to commence, i.e. ordinarily 2 weeks before the expected date of birth. This measure will increase the duration of maternity leave and the associated maternity benefit to be paid in cases where a baby is born prematurely, and indeed we had World Prematurity Day only recently. This is an issue that is so close to my heart, given my own experience, my own family, as a grandfather of a child who was born very prematurely and who is at home watching me tonight, I hope, Amy Berry, and doing fine, thank God now, but we needed to be sensitive around those areas. I also think it's important to speak on this bill in the light of the recent analysis performed by the publicpolicy.ie on the levels of severe deprivation within the EU. Indeed, as the publicpolicy.ie have noted, Eurostat have recently published data to the effect that 7.5% of the population, both in Ireland and in the EU, suffer from severe deprivation. And that is a large amount of people, Antara. The number ranges from 0.8% in Sweden to 31.9% in Bulgaria. A staggering difference. Ireland is in the middle rank of the countries with a rate of deprivation between 5 and 10% of the population, alongside the UK, Slovenia, Belgium, Spain, Poland, Slovakia and Portugal. If we look at the definition of severe deprivation that is implied, we can see that the situation really is quite shocking. Severely materially deprived persons have living conditions constrained by a lack of resources and experience at least 4 of the 9 following deprivation items the individual cannot afford. And if we're ahead to pay rent, struggling to pay rent, mortgage or utility bills on time, 2, to keep home adequately warm, and the heat, you know, is very important for all of us. Too much heat in here at times, but when we're out in a cold house, it's different. To face unexpected expenses, which some of my colleagues refer to, death grants and everything else. 4, to eat meat, fish or protein equivalent every second day, and that's not too much to ask for. And if we're a 1-week holiday away from home. And number 6, a car. We do know in the countryside, if you haven't a car, you might as well be, confined to your house. There's no public transport, so you can't afford taxis if you get them. And if you're shocked, a washing machine, not you think your most, luxury item. Number 8, a colour TV. Or indeed 9, a telephone, including a mobile phone. And we know the telephone allowance was cut. It was an awful blow to people some years ago, and it should have been replaced because a lot of pendant alarms went with them. Will this bill assist our people to move out of this kind of severe poverty I've just mentioned? Will we have to wait and see? The actions of this government to date would largely suggest that it will not, Minister, it will not get any of those people in those 9 categories out of those situations. While some of the measures of this bill are indeed welcome, as I have noted about the prematurity payment, much of it does not go far enough. So, Minister, and I wish you well in your post, and I have dealt with you as Chief Whip and in other positions that you were in, and you were always engaging and helpful, so I look forward to a positive work with you as well, and I'm inviting you to come down and visit our social welfare offices in Clare, and we might pay a trip to the Torres O'Fossack, I call it, the lads call it Torres Nua. Torres O'Fossack, that means a terrible journey, and it's a scandal. It was brought in here from across the water, and anything good never came in from there. We see what they're doing Brexit now, and that's what I mean. I'm not being racist, but Minister, please, it's a private company, got this job. I know the Farm Relief have it, and they're right to answer my 2 colleagues here. If you won't answer my well, every candidate getting in the door, taking off a CE scheme, taking off a valuable scheme that they want to go on to work, they're getting money for them, and they just want to get them in. And some people have got awful abuse at the hands of some officials in the Torres Niua offices, because the people inside behind the counters knew an awful lot less about the schemes and everything else than the people who go into them. And Deputy Healy raised right and others. The transport and no issues there, just hauling him into town 20 miles away once a week. They could be doing valuable work on the CE schemes at home, which many of them did, but they're denied that now CE schemes. And the CE schemes have been calling for an evaluation of those schemes, and now that for decades, for at least 10-12 years, to see the value of those schemes. And we're losing people all over the country. When they reach a certain age, they're put off. And where are they going to get work at 57, 58, 59? And we need some sensitivity. So, Minister, you need to come and see what's going on the ground. I'm sure you're well aware of it yourself. I also want to refer to the fact of the widows who didn't get anything in this budget. I also want to mention the women who were forced out of the workforce back when the marriage ban was there. You have to make a start here, Minister. There was no start. You said you couldn't afford to start it. Like 5 million would have went a long way towards starting to help those people who are discriminated against nakedly every week when they get their cheque in the post against their husbands or partners or anybody else. For what? For going out to do a noble duty, to have children and to rear them and educate them and make sure that they got their way in life as well. So, Minister, you could have started with some of the 5 million that St. Leo got for his communications bit. By God, it went fairly bad. Jackson the last couple of days, they couldn't communicate with each other, not to mind say communicating with the country and the people and the TDs and the backbenchers. And I bear no ill will to the Taoiseach. I wish her well. I think she was hard run by in many ways. But as I said, all communications and no substance. It's no good. And these gurus that you've hired in there, put some of that money towards looking after the widows, looking after the children, the private, as I said there. And again, to try and go down and see what Torres Niua, Torres O'Fossock are doing. Shouldn't be called Torres Niua. So, Minister, I'm appealing to you. You should have started in this budget on those. You couldn't give it all in 1 year. He said how much it cost. I accept that. But to Sockma, Lana Hibber, started and make some kind of a balance, as you did with the maternity leave. So be some bit sensitive. I know it isn't in your nature, the Fine Gael party, ever to be real sensitive for the ordinary people of Ireland. But look, some of you have a heart at least, I believe. But putting 5 million into a spin for St. Leo, Taoiseach, St. Leo, he'll get on a spin that he won't be able to get off of. And he's been fired out in his ear one of these days, the whole lot will collapse around us, and there'll be one big government, there'll be nothing else. And as I said at the start, we won't be getting the pensions. The widows will have to wait for the pensions until the 1st of April. Fool's Day, they'll be made a fool of, because there'll be no government to pay him, and you'll be out then knocking on doors, and we'll come back, maybe give another 3 months in negotiations to try and keep his sainthood in government. But the communication spin, they'll be gone off the gurus into some other job, for car communications or some other big job someplace else, and they don't care about the ordinary people. As all they're paid for is to put a spin of them in front with a hard hat turning his head and everything else. You don't see him standing in front of the social welfare offices, the Taoiseach, and hashtag Leo for the people. You don't see him standing in front of the Torres Niua offices, hashtag Leo for Taoiseach. It's hashtag the hell of the Connacht for the ordinary people, and it's not acceptable. Good morning.
Now, Deputy Rushing Chartalk.
Can Corley, and with the permission of the House, I'd like to share my time with Deputy Healy, please. Thank you. Minister, the contents of this bill are to be broadly welcomed, I suppose, insofar as they offer small increase in payments for those on social welfare. And it's about time that we started to begin that kind of catch-up that's required in relation to the incomes of those on social welfare, and they certainly went for a long period with very little or no increases at a time when the cost of living was increasing for a great many people in terms of the additional charges and taxes which were introduced by government over the austerity years and which people are still being saddled with. So I think it was people on fixed incomes, pensioners in particular, who were most negatively affected by those cuts. They had a fixed income, and yet all of these additional charges and taxes came in without any consideration of people's ability to pay. But I also think that this piece of legislation lacks ambition, insofar as the proposals are about maintaining the status quo, a small little increase, and do very little to address some of the systemic problems within the welfare system. I want to start by talking about the National Training Fund, and we're always hearing about the need to train and retrain and upskill the Irish workforce in order to reduce the very high rates of long-term unemployment, and there's no doubt that that is very much needed. And that's the reason, I suppose, why the National Training Fund levy increase was introduced. But it's quite a small increase, an increase of 0.1% from 0.7% to 0.8% in respect of reckonable earnings. And this is the first time that this levy has been increased since the fund was established 17 years ago. Now, that's just incredible, given the level of demand that there is for upskilling within our economy. And I think it speaks volumes also in light of the lack of action on a new national internship programme, for example. We were promised when JobBridge was abolished that there would be something coming in to replace that. So there is a need, obviously, for a much greater level of investment in a training programme. And, we heard too much fanfare about the youth guarantee that was introduced on a pilot basis in Ballymun, and which was reasonably successful, but that unfortunately it wasn't properly funded and it was only a pilot. But that kind of approach is very much needed in relation to young people who, for one reason or another, have fallen out of the education system at an early stage. Many of them who, I suppose, have been failed by the education system, where it hasn't been responsive to their needs, and where we have a significant cohort of young people who really are trying to cope with a whole range of different social problems affecting them themselves or family members or a number of family members. And in circumstances like that, where people are coming from very disadvantaged families and very disadvantaged communities, often, the obstacles facing them in terms of staying on in school, achieving in school and going on to some more some further education or training, really the obstacles are too great for them. And there is a need for very specific targeted programmes, I think, to tackle that kind of deep-rooted cultural problem of long-term unemployment. And I suppose that was the thinking behind the youth guarantee, but unfortunately it didn't come to anything. So there is a need for a much more targeted approach in that regard. And, to a large extent, there are an awful lot of young people coming from disadvantaged families who are simply not in a position to avail of opportunities that are out there. It's fine saying equal opportunities for people, but people don't start from the same position. So, the objective should be to achieve equal outcomes. And that means recognising the fact that some people are starting from a much lower place or a much more difficult place, and very often are not able to avail of the opportunities that are there. And clearly there is a need for tailored interventions in that regard. And I think too often we fail young people, and young men in particular, coming from difficult backgrounds, and because we're not providing the supports they need to participate fully and to be able to avail of education and work opportunities. So that is an area that urgently needs attention. The whole area of pensions, obviously, is a very significant area, and there's so many different aspects to it. First of all, in relation to the state pension, the €5 increase is welcome, yes, but again I would make the point that an awful lot of pensioners have been hit with very significant increases in the cost of living as a result of policies implemented by the previous government, and that €5 doesn't go very far in terms of coping with that. And, in a general sense, I think right across government there should be much greater emphasis on cutting the cost of living, whether that's in relation to welfare recipients or people who are working. If we can cut the cost of living, then, the value of what people actually get in their welfare payment or in their wages is much greater. So it makes much more sense to take a universal kind of approach. If, for example, we had universal healthcare, if we had universal free education which we don't even have at primary level, if we had a universal programme in relation to childcare, well then the wage demands and also the welfare payment demands would be much lesser, and that's a much more sustainable approach to our economy. Another issue in relation to pensions, of course, is this very thorny issue of those people who were affected by the 2012 changes. And those people who are now approaching retirement age and who feel very, very hard done by and very sore about the fact that they took time out of the workforce in order to look after children or, to do other caring duties. In many cases, they were forced out of the workforce because of the marriage bar, and they find themselves now at 63, 64, coming up to retirement age and realising that they're being penalised for having done that. And it is deeply unfair. At the time in 2012, it was done as a way of saving money when, the coffers were very bare. But it was a very unfair measure and really very much discriminates and militates against women in particular, because the vast majority of people affected are women. And, when this was highlighted in the media, Minister, you said that you were going to deal with this. It was reported that you were going to bring a memo on the issue to Cabinet within a matter of days. And yet you seem to back off that completely. And the line from government completely changed. We had the Taoiseach repeating this mantra that, the approach is going to change. It's going to be a total contributions approach, and we'll have the report on that. And those changes will be coming in 2020. Now, whatever about that, those kind of changes will not benefit people who are now finding themselves facing their retirement years with significantly reduced pension entitlements. So, Minister, as you recognised yourself a number of months ago when you were new into the job, this is an issue that needs to be tackled. And there is a growing kind of movement among women in their 60s who are determined to see this injustice put right. And you gave a commitment to them that you were going to tackle it, and you need to go ahead and do that now at an early stage, not with some measure in 2020. It's people who are facing into retirement now this year and next year who need to be given that kind of fair treatment. The other point, of course, in relation to pensions is the whole area of private pensions and defined benefit pensions. Again, we had the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill earlier in the year. The expectation was that that would provide for new legislation which would prevent solvent companies walking away from defined benefit pension liabilities when the pension fund was in difficulty, even though the company itself could be doing extremely well. And there's been a number of examples of where that was allowed to happen and workers were left high and dry. This isn't allowed to happen in the UK, for example. It just, it's not on that employers are allowed to treat their workforce like this, and it shouldn't be allowed here either. And there was an undertaking that in the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill that would be dealt with. I mean, it had just recently, before that bill came out, come to prominence at the end of last year with then Minister Varadkar highlighting this. It was made very clear through the INM scandalous behaviour in relation to their employees and their pensioners. And we were promised that this gap, this loophole in the legislation would be addressed. And that yet, when, Minister, you produced the Social Welfare and Pensions Bill, it wasn't in it. And we were told before the summer that you were bringing forward your own committee stage amendments. And I just wonder what's holding this up. I mean, there seems to be a very long delay with it. When are we going to see it, and when are we going to see your amendments? Because, as we speak, there are employers winding up their pension schemes and pensioners losing out. So, we shouldn't be wasting any more time on this. And there is the other factor about giving people notice and, giving notice that it's your intention to do this. And, of course, that is an invitation to some employers to get in fast before the law changes. So there is a real urgency about that. The other area in relation to pensions, of course, is the fact that the pension age has gone up to 66. The intention has been set out very clearly to increase that incrementally over the years. But the problem is that that hasn't been coordinated with the retirement age. And like for the last 2 years, I've been asking questions about this. When is the retirement age going to be brought into line with the pension age? Because it is an extraordinary indignity to people who maybe worked since they were 15 years of age and they find themselves at 65 having to retire. They've reached retirement age in their job according to their contract. They have to retire and they don't have an entitlement straight away to a contributory pension, even though they may have paid into it for 50 years. And that is a disgrace, really, that we have that situation. So there is a need for that working group that I understand has been meeting for some time between the Department of Enterprise and your own department minister to come up with a solution to that. But it's very badly needed, and it is no way to treat pensioners. The other point I would just make is that in relation to the working family payment, I note the name of that has changed and there's been a small increase, and that's to be welcomed. But I would just make that point that lots of us make on a regular basis about the need to advertise that scheme much more widely, because the take-up, it would seem, is not as good as it should be. And, you know, it has also been criticised by Social Justice Ireland because of the complexity of the application process. And it's a complex notion in itself, the way it operates, but the application process has been criticised, and I just wonder, is there a role there, for example, for NALA to simplify that for people, and many of those people, obviously, who would be applying may have literacy difficulties. The whole area of maternity and paternity leave is a very important one. And while there are small increases in this legislation, it is important to point out that we're starting from an exceptionally low base. And for example, if you look at most of the European countries where there's a full replacement rate for a person's salary, if you then look at what our equivalent is, our equivalent in full payment terms, full salary replacement terms, only comes to 9 weeks. 8.9 weeks actually equivalent. So we're way behind our European neighbours, and we need to start making significant progress in that area. And also, of course, in relation to paternity leave, we're actually only at 0.6 weeks full rate equivalent in European terms. So a huge gap there to be filled. And of course, we need to extend the right to flexible work options, even for unpaid career breaks and flexible work options. There's a very big demand for that, and we should at least do that at an early stage. I don't have time really to talk about the delays in processing payments, but I've counted at least 9 payments there where the waiting time is in excess of 6 months, and really that's not acceptable, Minister. Thanks.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on the Social Welfare Bill 2017. And I want to say, Minister, that women in particular are being discriminated against and being treated unfairly and unequally by our social welfare system, specifically in relation to the rules and regulations governing the state pension entitlement. The question of averaging, of bands and minimum contribution changes made by Minister Burton in 2012 all mean that women are being seriously disadvantaged and discriminated against by these changes. And of course that discrimination, that inequity is being continued in this social welfare bill by the Minister and by the Government. And of course everybody is aware of this. The Government are well aware of the situation, and each and every member of this House is aware of the situation, and it has been raised on numerous occasions by members right across the House. and the Minister recently gave the impression that she would deal with this problem, or at least make a start to deal with this problem, and treat women fairly and equally in relation to the state pension entitlement. We understood that a memo was to go to Cabinet on the 14th of November last to make a start in making the various changes. However, that has not happened, and the changes were not made, and they are not included in this bill. I raised this issue in the budget debate on the 10th of October last, and I particularly raised the question of the changes made by Deputy Burton in 2012. And these changes affected approximately 25,000 women, and many of their pensions were reduced. Some pensions were wiped out altogether, and some women were made dependent on their spouses and our partners in relation to pensions. It has been suggested that it would cost about €70 million to reverse the 2012 changes, and somewhat higher figures for retrospective backdating of the changes that were made. Now, there's no doubt that that money is readily available. This is a very wealthy country. And choices were made by this government and the previous government which could have been different and could have tackled this issue and still could tackle this issue. I refer in particular to the fact that in the last number of budgets, approximately €100 million a year were given back to the top 5% earners in this country, people whose average income would have been €180,000 per annum. Or we could have used, for instance, the tax foregone in the next 21 years by not taxing the banks. Or, of course, we could use the monies available, which we'll be talking about here tomorrow in relation to the Pay and Pensions Bill, where the government is proposing to give a €15,000 increase in pension to former Taoiseach, like Deputy Bertie Ahern and Deputy Brian Cowan. So there are choices that this government could have made, there are choices that this government should make, and properly treat women who have been disadvantaged and discriminated against in relation to the state pension. There are many other areas in the bill that need to be addressed, particularly in relation to children. We have 3,500 children homeless. There's 132,000 children now living in consistent poverty. That's 11.5% of the total child population. And these children need to be treated properly, and we need to ensure that the poverty trap and the poverty situation that they find themselves in is absolutely reversed. Related to that is the whole question of one-parent families, where 1 in 4 one-parent families again live in consistent poverty, and again these families were subject to cuts introduced by the former Minister Burton of the Labour Party, and those cuts need to be reversed and need to be reversed urgently. There's many other areas which need to be dealt with, including the whole question of the payment of job seekers allowance to young persons at the reduced rate. That needs to be increased. The question of the pension age, the question of family income supplement, which has only been increased by €10 for the first 3 children and no increase whatsoever for the 4th or subsequent child. Minister, or Lascian Corla, these are just some of the areas that I think should be dealt with, but I want to say finally again that the Minister should make a start in relation to stopping and ending the discrimination against women in relation to the state pension, and that should be done sooner rather than later.
And Peter Fitzpatrick.
The Social Welfare Bill 2017 is concerned with putting into law the measures announced in Budget 2018 on the 10th of October 2017, which are due to come into effect from or after the 1st of January 2018. These include measures to provide for increases in the maximum payment rate for weekly social protection payments and with proportional increases for claims of reduced rate and for qualified adults with effect from week commencing the 26th of March 2018. The bill also provides increases in the weekly rate for maternity, adopted paternity benefits, plus maternity benefits for mothers of premature born children beyond the 26 weeks already provided for. And it will also expand the circumstances in which maternity benefits will be paid to the father of a child when the mother has died. These measures will take effect for babies born on or after the 1st of October 2017. This bill proposes to change the name of the Family Income Supplement to the Working Family Payment, the WFP. The Working Family Payment is a weekly payment for people in low-paid employment who have at least one child. The Working Family Payment is payable to a family where the weekly income is less than a set amount, which varies depending on the family size. This income was designed to incentive employees to take up or remain in employment when they might have been only marginally better off if they were claiming social welfare benefits. The payment is based on 60% of the shortfall between the net weekly family income and the applicable weekly FIS threshold. The combined income of a couple married in a civil partnership or cohabiting is taken into account. In order to qualify for the weekly family payment, a person must be in paid employment which is expected to last for at least 3 months, work at least 38 hours a fortnight, have at least one child who normally lives with and is supported by him or her, and have an average weekly income below the designated income threshold for the family size. It was announced in Budget 2018 that from the 29th of March 2018, the Working Family Payment Income threshold will increase by €10 for a family with 1, 2 or 3 children. This means, in the case of a family which included only one child, to €521, in the case of a family which included 2 children, to €622, and in the case of a family which includes 3 children, to €723. The maternity benefit will increase by €5 to €240, and the adopted benefit will also increase by €5 to €240, and the same to the paternity benefit by €5 to €240. The proposed changes in social insurance payment increase of €5 per week in the maximum weekly state pension contributory, increase of €5 per week in the widowers, surviving civil partners contributory, pensions, deserted wives benefits. For carer benefits, our constant attendance allowance increased by €5 per week. Increase of €5 per week for recipients of disability benefits. Increase of €5 per week in job seekers, illness, health and safety injury benefits. Increase of €5 per week in maternity, adoptive and paternity benefits. Increase of €5 per week for death benefits. And there were also proposed changes for the social assistance payments, with €5 per week going to the state pension non-contributory, disability allowance, blind pensions, widowers, surviving civil partners, non-contributory pensions, pre-retirement, deserted wife allowance, supplement welfare allowance and farm assist. And there will be changes for one-parent family payments. This is a weekly payment for men and women under 66 who are bringing children up without the support of a partner. To receive this payment, clients must meet certain conditions and satisfy the means test. The one family payment is a taxable source of income. To qualify, you must satisfy the following conditions. Be under 66, because at 66 you become eligible for a state pension. Be a parent, a step-parent, adopted parent, or a legal guardian of a relevant child. This means a child under the relevant age limit. Be the main carer of at least one relevant child. The child must live with you. It is not payable if a parent has joint equal custody of a child or children and have a gross earnings from insurable employment or self-employment of €425 or less per week, or not being living with a spouse, civil partner or cohabiting. This payment will increase by €20 to €130 from the 29th of March 2018. Census 2016 showed that 25.4% of all families with children were families headed by £1. This accounts for 218,817 families and with children of any age and headed by one parent. The census also showed that 356,203 children live in one family, accounting for more than 1/5 of children in a family unit. In terms of the labour market participants, 53.5% of lone parents are not employed, 23.9% work part-time and 22% are in full-time employment. Minister, this is an area that needs more help because lone parents generally have low levels of education when compared to the general population. The level of education attained by parents tend to be influenced by the level of education of children, which in turn has impact on the economic outcome and mental health and physical health. Minister, in Dundalk we have the DKIT, and the good thing with the DKIT in Dundalk is that 80% of the children that attend the DKIT in Dundalk are from local families. And in fairness, Minister, a lot of these parents wouldn't be maybe as educated. Like, you know, most of these parents might not even got a third level education. And I think the likes of the DKIT is doing a fantastic job. And Minister, we also have a problem with childcare costs in Ireland, among the highest in the OECD countries. And lone parents, as the sole carers of children, are more likely to be affected by children's costs. Also, Minister, the cost of care